And we are back on chapter 98. 98 chapters we've done already. Amazing. On the chosen baseball journey. Do not adjust your set. That is not Steve Carsey with me. He's off in spring training with the Los Angeles Angels, and they are fighting for a tough battle because, man, they got a tough division over there with Texas, Houston, etc. This is Karim Garcia, former MLB player. Karim, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Always happy to be with you.
Steve was talking with me and very excited about the fact that we are going a different route because we spent almost 2 seasons discussing the game from a pitcher's point of view, and now we get to hear it from a hitter's point of view because you guys are as different as it comes as far as your careers and as far as what your positions were. And so I had a topic set up today, which we're going to talk about, but it's going to take kind of a twist. So bear with me because I want you to think about this as we're going along. And the idea was like this. If Karim Garcia is going to the Hall of Fame tomorrow, what hat would he wear? Karim, I'm not accepting this no hat business. We've gone so politically correct in this world where you can't be on the disabled list. It's got to be on the injured reserve. You can't have the Cleveland Indians. It's the Cleveland Guardians. Okay, fine. I accept it, but you got to wear a hat and you got to pick a team. So we got 3 players going in right now. Okay, very, very easy. 2 of them, we got Todd Helton, obviously going in as a Rocky since he only played with the Rockies. We got Joe
Mhm.
Mauer, only played with the Twins. Adrian Beltre. Adrian Beltre, Adrian Beltre, Adrian Beltre. We got the Rangers, we got the Dodgers, we got the Mariners. When you close your eyes and you picture Adrian Beltre, where do you see him, Kareem?
Dodgers. With the Dodgers, I was just barely getting to the major leagues when he was coming up through the minor league system. And I remember every step of the way in the minors, he was, raking all the time. He was putting big numbers, and eventually he had the opportunity to play at the major league level with the Dodgers.
Now, he did play with the Red Sox also for a brief cup of coffee, but we're going to forget about that period. But it's kind of funny when you think about it. If you got the Adrian Beltre, I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this one. You have the Adrian Beltre from the Dodgers. He's not going to the Hall of Fame. I mean, he didn't play long enough, obviously, and he was still getting his feet wet, so to speak. Signs with the Mariners. Not a bad period of his career. Don't get me wrong. It was a big contract at the time, but to me, I didn't see Hall of Fame out of that. And I think it's not his fault per se. It was just, in that market and that team with the lack of success at the time, it's just not envisioning it. Where I feel like it came together with him, it was the perfect synergy, was that Rangers team. That's where he really shined at the end of the day. That's where really people accepted there's the MVP Beltre, there's the Gold Glove Beltre, there's the guy, the all around game. And it was a great ballpark for him and a great lineup to be around. I love that fit. Uh, I'm torn because when I picture him and I close my eyes and I see Adrian Beltre, I agree with you. I see it as the Dodgers. I wish he could have stayed with the Dodgers, but they had different ownership back then. If it was Dodgers ownership right now, they'd sign him to a 30-year contract and they would delay all the money. But that ownership back then was a little tighter on the money, so they were not going to give him those funds. And when he left the Dodgers, it's funny, people thought he's only going to head down now. There was a lot of people talking about that. Boy, were they wrong. I mean, Elger Beltre only got better with age. It was incredible. And it's a guy that when you watch him day in and day out, you don't think of, like we talked about Frank Thomas a couple weeks ago. He's not that imposing Frank Thomas. He's not that Palmero. He's not Griffey, but he's just so steady in everything he did. There's not one facet of the game that he was lacking in. I think a lot of people did not appreciate the greatness of Adrian Beltre until he was done.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I get to watch him play. We never play together. We play against each other. But like you mentioned, playing third base, playing a position which is hard. He was a very built guy, not very tall, but built, very strong. He will steal bases at the beginning of his career. He got everything, all 5 tools. So the Dodgers know they got a 5 tool player. They just didn't want to pay the money because he wasn't a all-star caliber at the time. He needed a few more years to be there, and they were a very impatient team because they needed to go back to the playoffs.
And this is where the Dodgers in the day, they were able to find these guys at very young ages, yourself included. But players at very young ages, you think about it, you're up in the major leagues between 19 and 21. Generally, you don't come into your own until you're 27 years old. And then guess what? If you're lucky enough to hit free agency at 26, 27, you're now just starting to come into your own, and they haven't even got the upside of you yet.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, when you get there very early in the on your age, like Acuna and Beltre and myself, you still trying to figure it out what's going on at the major league level, trying to get your feet wet, try to understand everything. And I mean, if you're fortunate enough to be there all those years, when you hit your first contract or your first free agent, then you're ready to go.
And I'll be honest, I was the first one back in the day as he was retiring. I said Adrian Beltre is not going to the Hall of Fame. I said that at the time. And it's simply because he was not that monster of a player to me. To me, the Hall of Fame was the Hall of Fame. It's Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, and it's the hardest Hall of Fame in the world to get into. And you can be very, very good, but it's not the Hall of Very Good. It's the Hall of Fame. And all of a sudden, like I was a big Lee Smith fan, but I didn't picture Lee Smith as a Hall of Famer. He's in the Hall of Fame. I mean, his numbers were great. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like he had a one ERA, one WHIP every single year. He was a workhorse certainly, but he was more in the Blyleven type where it was done over time. Maybe didn't have all those monster seasons, but just continuously. And you know what? To play continuously good for 20 seasons and average as a hitter 20 home runs or as a pitcher to average 15 wins, that's still pretty freaking amazing. And when somebody told me to look back at all the numbers overall on Beltre and you look at totality, to me, what Burt Blyleven was as a pitcher, Adrian Beltre is as a hitter, and that's a no-brainer Hall of Famer then.
Yeah, I mean, you still got to hit 150 hits every year for 20 years to get to 3,000, which Beltre did. He got over 3,000 hits, get over 400 home runs. I mean, the numbers are there. Like you mentioned, it wasn't overnight or it was an all-star every single year, but he put up the work to be there now.
Now, when you were a kid growing up, as you're getting into baseball, from the time you picked up your first bat, your first glove, can you name me all the positions you played on the field?
All the positions that I play on the field,
Yes.
well, first base and outfield because I'm a lefty.
So never pitcher, never catcher, never shortstop.
Never infield, never any other position but left field, right field, center field, first base. That's it.
So a guy that I feel is getting a little bit of a bad rap now is Joe Mauer because Joe Mauer, the purists are saying, I don't see the numbers. I don't see the numbers. And I don't think it's fair to measure a catcher against an outfielder, against a first baseman. It's a very demanding. I mean, you're the quarterback basically of the field there, like in that crouched position, and you're the one that has to memorize all the pitchers, and you got to be able to get, defensively wise, you're in the game the whole time. Plus you're hitting. As far as the catcher position goes, I don't think we've seen too many like Joe Mauer of what he did out there. And to me, he was a Hall of Famer. I agreed with the vote with it. I like the fact he was with one team, but a guy doesn't have to crank 35 home runs. I mean, what did he win? Three batting titles, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Uh, Consistency again at the catcher position, I think it was worthy to acknowledge him. So I was not surprised by that vote.
I was a bit surprised, like you mentioned, because nowadays in the Hall of Fame they go for the numbers, like the Piazza, the Ivan Rodriguez, those guys that they have come up with catching, going to the Hall of Fame. 400 home runs, RBIs. Joe Mauer does have the batting titles, but doesn't have the ring, because Minnesota didn't win a ring with when he was there, and that's how kind of they value those stats, and I mean he got a great career, don't get me wrong, great hitter, smart guy, lovable, always, working and doing stuff not only for the team but for the fans too.
And this is where I hate to say that, but as far as politically wise, if you're a player with sideburns and you take every single interview and you're signing autographs and you're smiling all the time versus somebody who's very grouchy and never wants to talk to the media and never wants to sign for the fans, I think the people who vote for you in the Hall of Fame remember if you were nice to them or not at the end of the day. Ask Jack Morris. I mean, you think about Jack Morris. any big game you have, if you're gonna give up, if you're gonna get score 10 runs, he'll give up 9 runs. If you score 5 runs, he'll give up 4 runs. Morris always did whatever he had to do to win. You think about that game with Atlanta and Minnesota, and the 1-0 game. I mean, this guy was the horse of the horse, and the numbers were there. But it's a guy that was never like great, like he was never the top of his game, but he was just consistent every single year, did it for like close to 20 years or more, and was just always steady, a workhorse. And to me, there's numbers there. Roland was a guy that I was a bit surprised with, but it goes to show you the defensive side of the game, they put a lot more value on it than they used to. When you get 10 plus gold gloves, they're paying attention to you. That's where I was surprised Omar Vizquel didn't get in. Besides anything that was discussed about him personally, to me, Ozzie Smith was in. Omar Vizquel is in for me. Scott Rowland is in. Then Adrian Beltre is getting in for sure. So this is where I think they're making a lot more lax. Plus, they're looking at different stats than they used to. Back then they looked at wins for pitchers. Now they look, at all sorts of, metrics and, this advanced stats. And it drives me up the wall because to me, it's not about those stats. It's about watching guys on the field and were they great when you watch them. And this guy, to me, is he a Hall of Famer or not? Like when he walked into a clubhouse, when you saw him on the field, did he stand out among his peers? And if he did, that's a Hall of Famer. That was my measuring stick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, back in the days, 80s, 90s, 70s, it was a different way to see the players and the numbers. Nowadays, they're going a little bit too crazy for me, adding all this stuff to see if you're a Hall of Famer or not. Whatever you did on the field, it shows it, and that's how they're supposed to be, taking that in consideration.
This was one of my major decisions when I walked away from baseball blogging back in the day. I remember talking to somebody at ESPN because I like talking about the stories. I like the background on the person. I like that more the human side of it. And they said to me, if you're going to write about baseball, you have to study statistics and you have to only talk about statistics. That's all anybody wants to read about. And I said, I don't want to write a math textbook. I want to write a baseball article. I said, if you want a math textbook, it ain't going to happen. And I walked away. And I think this is even like scouts. I've talked about this with Steve many times. When you have scouts that they go to the field, they talk to the players, they get a measure for it. Some teams still value that. A lot of them value the guys that have never walked onto a baseball field and just know how to put numbers into a spreadsheet and calculate that out. So baseball's gone very different since our generation.
Absolutely. And you know what? I understand the numbers help you a lot, but back in the days, they just told you exactly. They give you a sheet with every name on the other team's roster, especially with the pitchers, and you figure it out kind of like, oh, he throws a slider on these situations. He has a good sinker. This is his out pitch. He begins with this. I mean, they made it simple. Nowadays, you get a whole book for 3 days or 4 days that you're going to face a team, and that's unbelievable. I mean, that's way too much information for someone to process in such a short period of time.
Imagine you're about to go up the bat and they hand you an iPad and you're sitting on the bench and you got the iPad and they're showing you the last two starts from that starting pitcher you're about to go up against. It's funny. Your mind starts going into those games, right? Instead of just focusing, I just need to go hit.
Yes, absolutely. The only thing I look and I asked for the video to the guys was show me man in scoring position with less than 2 outs. What did he throw? And that's all I look for. I concentrate on what he did the last game with man in scoring position against a left-hander hitter. That's all I look for. I simplify everything for me. Why? Because he was going to pitch the same way.
And sometimes simpler is better. So I gotta
Yeah.
ask. So I gotta ask you for a guy like we covered off two of these Hall of Famers. By the way, it's four because Jim Leland is going in as well. And did you ever get to interact with Jim Leland?
Never. I saw him against me when I was playing. He was I guess with Pittsburgh and Detroit and a couple of teams over there, but I never had him as a manager.
Can you imagine? And I mean, you've watched him. I'm sure you've seen him across the dugout. You've heard the stories. Imagine being a starting pitcher and he comes to take the ball from you and you don't give it to him. I imagine that doesn't end very well for the pitcher. That Jim Leland was the one guy that I watched, old school, no nonsense. He was in control. and the players respected that. And I think that the game needs more Jim Lelands. He was incredible.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure if he asked for the baseball, you give it to him, just like the Tony La Russa or the Tom Lasordas. Those guys would have never take that, and they would have showed you right then in the mound what happens if you don't give him the ball.
Probably spanked them, and back then you could do that. So the last guy, which I think is a no doubter, but I know purists are debating on this one still, is Todd Helton. So I gotta ask you, from a guy been there, done that, when the Rockies come into MLB baseball and they're an expansion team, and the thin air over there, generally, how different is it to play in Colorado than anywhere else in MLB?
Oh, it's a paradise to play in Colorado, but I'm still you have to put up with the weather too. I mean, everyone says, "Oh, it's over here. You're gonna hit 50 home runs." Yeah, it's not that simple. Even if you hit the ball towards the thin air, you still gotta hit the ball. The park is really big, and you have to play 81 games home, 81 games on the road. So you have to add up both numbers, and you have to work the 162 games just like anyone else. No one talks about Baltimore. Baltimore, the ball carries just as much as Colorado, and it's a couple other teams over there that the ball carries, like Philadelphia, for example. The ball carries a lot too there, and no one talks about that.
So why are they so focused on Colorado? And why did this hurt Todd Helton's chances for so long? If he played on Philadelphia, if he played on Baltimore with those stats, he would have been the Hall of Fame long ago. So why do they penalize Colorado so much? What is that? Why do they have that impression of it?
Because the press made it to be like there was paradise, and every time you hit the ball in the on the outfield is a home run, which is not true. I mean, I understand it's a thin air, but it's a big park. Believe me, it is a huge park to get a home run.
I mean, you look at the guys that did play through there, right? I mean, Larry Walker did make it through, but he didn't play just for Colorado. I remember
Mhm.
Dante Bichette played there for a bit. Vinny Castilla, obviously your countryman, and Bichette's not in the Hall of Fame. Castilla's not in the Hall of Fame. They had great stats, certainly. But you're looking at Todd Helton. There's a guy, you look at his statistics and you think to yourself, 40 home runs, pretty much, 30, 40 home runs guaranteed every single year.
Mhm.
He stayed on the field relatively healthy. He played a long career. I see no issues here. This is a guy that was great for a long time. Nobody had a bad word to say about him. Apparently a great teammate. Stayed with his team his whole career. There's your Hall of Famer. I mean, to me, he's a Hall of Famer. There's no even discussion about it. At the end, it's not his fault that he got drafted by them. And it's not like he went out on the road and hit a buck 50 every single time. He still had very good statistics. But let me ask you this. Is it, for example, let's say you play in Philadelphia, you play in Baltimore, anywhere you're playing, do you not generally have more of an advantage when you're playing at home?
Yeah, I mean, you have more advantage playing at home than on the road, especially if you're playing like in Baltimore or you're playing Philly. I mean, remember Brady Anderson hit 50 homers one year as a leadoff hitter. He hit like 35 at home. No one say anything about that. You know.
Years later, they kind of hinted about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's a
Yeah.
different issue.
Chris Davis, but that's another issue altogether. No, but if you look consistently at player statistics, they tend to do better at home than on the road. And if you could explain to people so they understand from a baseball perspective, I mean, there's all the sports obviously, but it's more baseball. I mean, it's such a long season, 162 games. You're 81 games. You're on the road, living in a hotel. There's something about sleeping in your own bed and being at home, right? That just you tend to play better.
Absolutely. I mean, you can watch your kids, take them to school, relax. You're a little more, relaxed than on the road. On the road, you don't get the same sleep, even if you get in your 8 hours of sleep or whatever you take. I mean, at home, you're with your family, you're eating your own food, you're having your breakfast, you're doing your own thing right there, and you're a little more relaxed, I should say.
Let's say you're playing all your games on the East Coast, and then you're doing a West Coast trip, and you're on the road, West Coast. You played a night game. You have an afternoon game the next day. Time zones. It. I mean, it takes a while to adjust the body, when you're doing all these kind of trips.
Absolutely, especially if you finish a night game and then you go from the East Coast to the West Coast. Like if you go from New York to Anaheim, I mean that's a long flight to begin with. Then you get early in the morning, you get only like 6, 7 hours sleep. Then you go to the park to be ready for the game. Your body is not adjusting yet to the time zone, and not even to the place. So it's that's what takes a toll sometimes into the guys.
And it's funny, you hear about stories back in the day where you'd have a team in the summertime and they're going on the road and the home team shut off their air conditioning, so there's no air conditioning working in the visiting clubhouse. Teams will do whatever it took to have an advantage. I heard about one where they pulled the fire alarm on them before a playoff game so that they all get woken up at 3 a.m. Stuff like this used to happen, every little advantage. If you're going into an afternoon game in the playoffs and your fire alarm went off at 3 in the morning, it's gonna disrupt your sleep.
Absolutely, your rest, your sleep, and then now you're thinking other stuff that you don't have to or need to think about. Going to that game.
So we're gonna bring it full circle now, Kareem. So we got the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, Tigers, Orioles, Indians, Guardians, Yankees, Mets. When you close your eyes and you picture your career, if you're picturing yourself with one hat on, which team is it?
I would say that the one that the I enjoyed the most and had good year was with the Indians out of all of them.
Interesting.
You
So, yeah.
you were saying probably Yankees, huh?
I was gonna say
But
Yankees. When I picture you, I just picture Yankees. There's something about you on the Yankees, no nonsense on the field. But you know where I think your career best took off, and I think was the best stop for you was the Tigers. I loved Kareem Garcia on the Tigers. I think that was a really nice stop, and I think they should have given you 6 years, $150 million, and you would have taken it. So probably. But
easily.
who was your manager when you were on the Tigers?
It was Parrish on the first year, and the second year was um, Phil. It was the manager for Kansas City that came to the Tigers. I forgot his name right now.
That's okay. But Lance Parrish was the first one.
Yes.
They went through a few transitions after their magical 87 season. It took them a while to come back to relevancy until they got Jim Leland, until they put that team together. And you look back at that team, you look at the Marlins, you know what? Ivan Rodriguez as your quarterback as catcher makes a big difference. We're talking about a Hall of Fame. To me, outside of the statistics, and he had great statistics, he was a Hall of Famer. But when he comes and his team magically is winning, and you take that one guy to the equation and not winning anymore, that's a Hall of Famer. But you see yourself, you see it in the Indians. Very interesting. I think it's because it was a great you enjoyed playing there. Like it was a good fit for you. And we talked about that in a previous episode. I remember when you came on with myself and Steve, that it was up to you. You would have stayed on the Indians. Like you just liked playing there. And it seems like a lot of guys when they were on the Indians and that clubhouse, maybe it was because of the movie Major League. I don't know, but once you're there, people loved playing with that team.
Yes, we did. I mean, it was such a relaxed environment. It was like very friendly, good chemistry. Everything came together for that team, and we were a pretty good team too. I mean, we were not that bad.
No, it was just that Indian squad for all those years were so close, so close. And then it's always money, always money, always money. And they keep having to lose a guy here, lose a guy there. And in today's economics, it's hard to keep these players together. It's almost an impossibility. So I got to ask you as we wrap up today's episode, when we're looking back now at the 2023 World Series, and we know the Rangers won it all, but for you having been with the expansion Diamondbacks back in the day, when they make it to the World Series, was there anything more special for you because having been there from day one?
With the Diamondbacks?
Yeah, like were you rooting for the Diamondbacks to win the World Series? Who were you rooting for in that World Series?
Of course I was because I knew most of those guys, except for Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling. The rest of the guys like Matt Williams, Jay Bell, and the other guys, Devon White, all those guys. I played with them from the beginning, and I was very happy for them to get the World Series.
Yeah, and then but now years later, and now we have a whole new. I mean, this Diamondbacks is nothing like that expansion one and the one that won the World Series. But even still, when they make it to the World Series, is it more special for you because you were part of their expansion team in the day?
I was happy for them. I never thought they were going to make it to the World Series to begin with, but I was
None of us
very
did.
impressed. Yeah, I was impressed with the team, the way that they play. They never gave up. They did the whole thing. The little things. Bunting the ball, stealing bases. They were great. But at the end of the day, I I said that Texas was going to win, regardless if I was rooting for the Diamondbacks or not. I knew that Texas had a better team at that time.
If you're a betting man and we're looking towards the 2024 season, who do you see as the World Series matchup if you had to predict right now? The season hasn't started yet. If you had to go with the two teams, AL, NL, who do you think is going to be in the World Series this year?
That's a very good question. Right now, we have to go like the favorite is the Dodgers, but for some reason, they always find a way not to make it to the World Series. So I'm not picking the Dodgers. I'm saying probably the Diamondback has a good chance over there again to make it to the World Series. And on the American side, the American League, I'm gonna get. Let me think. I wish to see Toronto over there. They have a good team. But I mean, sometimes, pitching wise, they struggle a little bit.
Wow, so you're seeing a Diamondbacks Blue Jays World Series.
Yeah.
And who's going to win the World Series this year?
I want to see the Blue Jays winning the World Series, see what happens.
I didn't pay him to say that, folks. And I'll tell you something right now, Kareem. You go put $2,000 in Vegas on that, you're going to make a lot of money, my friend. If I had to bet right now, I'm saying Phillies and Rangers. I still am shocked the Phillies didn't make it after they came so close for a couple years. And the Rangers, I think, are still too strong. They're going to get a lot of pitching back after the All-Star game, and they're just so set in every position wise. And this is the year the Phillies are pulling it out. So I'm telling you right now, it's gonna be the Phillies World Series done deal. So we'll see.
Wow.
Yeah,
Hey, it's a long season. We'll see.
it's a
We'll
long
talk
season.
about it halfway through the season on the All-Star break.
All I can tell you is that I at spring training last year, I was gonna put the money on the Phillies, and Steve talked me out of it. And up until I thought they were gonna beat the D-backs, I said, "Oh my God, I should have bet on the Phillies." And when the Diamondbacks went to the World Series, Steve Carson comes back to me and says, "This is why you don't bet on baseball because you never ever know. It's a long season and anything can happen in a short series. Anything,
Anything, that's correct.
including the Diamondbacks and Blue Jays." So you heard it here first from Karim Garcia. Kareem, thank you for your wisdom, your knowledge. Fans, please send in your questions to Kareem Garcia. Things you'd like to hear topics wise on the chosen baseball journey. And we'll be coming back next week with a whole new topic as the 2024 season is upon us. Stay tuned.